bridges the space between liquid and ice, and it's through her remarkable photos that water reveals its awareness, not only of creation, but also of intention. Her fascinating findings push the boundaries of science and spirituality and art and offer us a profound and transformative perspective into water. Her most recent book, The Secret Intelligence of Water, is available through her website at vedaustin.com. I highly recommend you visit her website and take a look at everything that she has to offer. And so please join me in giving a very warm welcome to my dear friend, the beautiful Veda Austin.
Well, thank you so much. And it's wonderful to be here. And my apologies. And thank you so much for your patience for me, but just a little bit late. So, Anastasia, thank you for that. And I feel very welcomed by you all. So, I thought today I would just share, well, thank you everyone, I would just share a little bit about me and teach you my technique. So you guys can do this at home if you want to try it at home yourselves. And then I thought I would just take a bit of a jump, because you can go to most any podcast and learn about my story, learn about, see a lot of my pictures. You go to my website to see a lot of the work of water and all of the incredible crystallography. But I kind of like to also share the work that I'm most excited about now, so you guys are really up to date with some of my more latest work, and also where it's going. So I'd love to take you guys on that journey with me. So I'm going to do two different presentations. It's a little bit of a mismatch, but I'm sure you'll be able to just go with the flow, given that is something that is very important to do when it comes to water. So
and Veda, you should have the ability, to share your screen, and we see it. So thanks for that.
No worries at all. So for those that don't know anything about me or my work, in a nutshell, I am a crystallographer, which is just a fancy way of saying that I have a very specific technique of freezing to a liquid crystal stage. So essentially, I'm able to prove that through this method that water can receive information from the external world, or from thoughts, or from intention, or from music, or from physical things. Receive that information. I think light is the information highway, that it receives and absorbs the information. And when given the correct environment, which is a specific freezing time, what I see is that in the crystallography, there is an imprint of some kind relative to the influence. And I'm going to give you an example of the first time I ever saw this happen in a minute around my hand. But I would also like people to understand that this is not just what some people call as pareidolia. I want to address that, because that is where you are just basically looking at a little crack and think, oh, that looks like, a happy face or something. And with this work, I'm going to show you that I have addressed that by doing a survey, which was suggested that I do this through Dr. Gerald Pollack, who wrote The Fourth Phase of Water. And essentially, he said, why don't you take like several of your photographs and put it into a questionnaire and say, what does this photograph look like to you? And so I did 25 of those photos. I did a whole questionnaire simply saying, what does this image look like to you? People didn't know what they were looking at, and people didn't know what the medium of it even was. And so I gave it to friends who shared it around social media. And this was before anyone really even knew my work very well. So it was really quite good to be able to do it then, so people weren't recognizing any of the pictures. And so what we found is that 295 people did the survey, and out of all 25 pictures, 85% of people could recognize the imagery in the crystallography for what the influence was. And there were 3 images where 100% of people could recognize the imagery for what the influence was, and this next picture was one of them. Now, I do want to also tell you that the first few pictures I'm showing you is when I did not use my freezing method, because I hadn't
We're not
discovered.
seeing the, sorry,
I
Veda,
have
we're not seeing the
no,
images.
it's okay. I'm just leading you into it first.
Okay.
I haven't started sharing them yet. Um, and so I'll start doing that, but I'll explain as we're looking. So my very first image was where I was very curious if water really could store information or have what we term, or some people term as memory. And through various inspirations, Emoto was there. Obviously, he was not embraced by the scientific community for lack of repeatability and controls and varied things, but it did open the door for people to see themselves as sensitive bodies of water, sensitive to thoughts, sounds, music, frequency, environment, etc., etc. There's an amazing guy called Laurent Costa who takes microscopic photographs also of water, and he was seeing smiley faces and fish and things and cats, things relative to his thoughts or his world or his environment. And so I'm like, there's something here, I think. So I wanted to see for myself. So I got some water that I'd had a healing experience with. I've used all kinds of waters over the many, many years, the 14 years, and I have approximately 70,000 photos of water responding in an intelligent way now, which is definitely not random. And so this was my very first one. Was thought I'm going to project a thought into the water because that seemed the most random thing relative to what Emoto's work was. And so I'm holding my dish and I noticed there's some fluff in the water. So I was like, oh my God. So I put my hand in and took out the fluff and thought, I wonder if my hand will have any impact on the water's quote unquote memory. So I thought that thought will do. And I just put the water into my freezer with the peas and broccoli, regular freezer. I'm not using a flash freezer or anything like that. And I froze it solid. That's what I was starting to say. I used to, because I didn't know any better, freeze water solid for 1 year. And now I have not done that in 13 years. But to see imagery like this show up in a solid is really, really remarkable when you understand how water freezes. And so I took it out of the freezer, held it up to the light, and I took the photo to the right, which was of, well, it looks just like an X-ray of my hand. And this, there were, like I said, there were 3 photos where 100% of people recognized the image, and this was one of them. Now, then I was like, wow, maybe that was a coincidence, although it did freak me out. So I was a little nervous to start again, but I couldn't help myself. So I went to the sea and I collected some seawater. And I've just froze a thin layer of it. And you can, I don't know, my pointy thing's not working for some reason. So, but you can see the outline of the fish and the round eye and the fins and the gills and the tail. And you can see that it's very feathery, and that is because salt water freezes differently than fresh water, especially when frozen to a solid. And this was not salted water, this was naturally salt water from the ocean. This was another one where I froze water solid, and this was from after talking about these giant skeletons that have been found around the world. And I was on the phone to a friend, and I wasn't trying in any way to inspire or influence the water. The dish of water was just on the bench, and I went and froze it because there are many, many, many times, and even more so now than ever, where I'm not trying to influence the water. I've seen water respond so intelligently so much that I'm more interested to see what water will show me. And so in this particular situation, I'd just been on the phone talking about these skeletons, and this kind of skull was showed up in the ice. And you'll see different colors coming through my work, more so when I show you the new method. That is because the new method allows a lot of light to come through. It's a very, very thin layer of ice, and the background colors come through. And I enjoy working with that because I also, as well as studying archaeology, when I went to university, I also worked professionally as an oil painter for many, many years. So I see the world very artistically, as well as being very curious about the ancient world, as well as being a researcher. After I had a healing experience, like I mentioned, I worked in research, head of research and development for a company that was really interested in understanding the qualitative healing properties of this water. So I look at things from a threefold perspective: scientifically, artistically, and also through a spiritual or conscious lens. My father is native New Zealand Maori, so there is also that Indigenous perspective that I like to bring in. So this is the difference between old and new method. Old method is simply freezing water as a solid. New method is where I freeze water for about 5 minutes and 30 seconds in my regular freezer, which is at minus 16 degrees Celsius. I don't know what that's in Fahrenheit, but I'm sure it's just a Google away. And it doesn't really matter what your freezing setting is. It's just about understanding when to take when to take the water out. And I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. But when I was curious about discovering fourth phase water, which is more of a gel, the stage between liquid and ice, where there's more viscosity, there's negative charge, there's more ordered molecular structure, there's various different qualities. Actually, H3O2 rather than H2O has an extra hydrogen and oxygen atom, and it behaves differently and absorbs more information because it absorbs more light. And so I started opening the freezer earlier and earlier to see when these patterns started to form. And at around 5 minutes and 30 seconds in my freezer, I noticed there was something going on. There was liquid on top, ice underneath, and I'm like, what's that ice showing? So I took it out of the freezer, tipped the liquid water away, and photographed the crystallography that is much more is sheets of this fourth phase water. So I didn't take this one. This picture is of my son took this when he was a little guy, and his name is Rama. He's part Indian, named after Lord Rama, and from the Indian belief systems. And Lord Rama normally has a bow and arrow, and my son knew this, and he was trying to con me into buying him a bow and arrow. And I said, I don't know, babe, we'll think about it. And so he was very, very perceptive as to what I was interested in. And so he knew I was really into doing this work. And so he said to me, Mum, if I can get an arrow or a bow in the water, in the crystallography, will you let me have a bow and arrow? And so I was very impressed with his ingenuity and his confidence. And so I said, yeah, okay, that's looking promising. And so what he did, though, was so interesting, and I encourage people to try this. Rather than just, drawing a bow and arrow and putting the dish of water on top of it, or thinking about a bow and arrow, or any of those kinds of things, that's not what he did. He got his little petri dish of water. He pulled his imaginary bow back and he shot his arrow into the water. And when he knew it had got in there, that's when he froze his sample, pulled it out, and he took this photograph. And as you can see, it very much looks like an arrow with an arrowhead. You can really see detail, color, and texture. This is what my freezing method allows people to do. And needless to say, the little guy got his bow and arrow. So I want to give you a little video of my freezing method, and then we're going to jump forward into my latest work. I'm going to talk over this video demo so that you feel like you've at least got some grasp of what I'm doing in the kitchen. Okay, so I use glass. Glass is made of silica. Silica is a crystal. It helps water to store information for longer. It's the same size as my hand, 10 centimeters in diameter. I'm putting approximately 2 tablespoons of water in this dish, but the main thing you need to remember is that it just covers the bottom, and that when you tip it, there should be 3/4 empty and 1/4 pooling. That is the ratio for any size dish, small or large. You just add less water for small, more water for large. So I'm using a regular freezer, and you can see there's stuff in my freezer. I put it on the top because it freezes faster on the top than on the bottom. Most things that are frozen are in a state of suspension, so they're not influencing the sample. I put a timer on for 5 minutes and 30 seconds. Now that depends. It can be longer if the motor of the fridge is off. So if it's not making a sound, basically you need to just leave it and give it another 3 minutes and come back and take a photo. It should look like this, where you see liquid on top and ice underneath. That's the stage you want to see it at. Now, normally though, for me, 5 minutes and 30 seconds is enough. Now, you have to wipe the bottom of frostwood or frozen. There's liquid, there's ice. That's what you want to be looking for. You tip the liquid away. You can refreeze that and have a longer conversation. And then what you have is something called crystallography that is stuck to the dish. You can see in this one, there is this kind of lotus shape with these stars inside. And the lotus and the star are actually hydroglyphs. And that's what I'm going to get to next. And a hydroglyph is essentially symbols in ice that I have to have seen repeat at least 50 times using a written word influence. And no, not just in English, but in the same word in multiple languages. And essentially, the amazing thing that I'm seeing, that I seem to have more a scientific attention for because science loves repeatability, is that there seems to be this kind of language of symbols. And it's not that water is reading words, but it seems to be picking up on the energy of a word and reverse engineering it back to some kind of living principle that can be seen, that can be photographed, is repeatable, but that can also be embodied. See, I think of liquid crystal as the message, but liquid water as the messenger. And what my children and the young people of the world have been teaching myself and other parents and other people is that their tendency is to straight away eat this crystallography. And what we found is that when you use a word, a written word, so what you do is you write the word, put your dish of water on top of it for 30 seconds. It does not it doesn't help if you give it a long period of time as an influence and then leave it. So, for example, maybe you want to put a crystal in the water and you think that if you left it there for 10 hours or 5 days, then it's going to give a stronger influence. That is not true, not in my experience. In my experience, I found that the more your conscious expression is connected to the water and what you're looking at, the more likely you're going to see an example show up. If you move away and go and do the vacuuming or something, you are no longer connected to the thought of what you were originally focused on, and the water is more interested in what your focus is than what the physical thing you might have put in the water is. So it's very, very likely that you don't even need 30 seconds. I mean, I do this quite often with no time, like a second or just a thought. See, water seems to be reading exactly what your intention or thought is before you even have accumulated that idea. I approach water and it's already read my information. I think that there are multiple states of water, and I very much think that water is reading potentials because in my last video that I shared on Instagram, there's examples of seeds. Putting a sunflower seed in water, removing it, it doesn't design the seed, it designs the outcome of the seed, it designs the sunflower. And I've repeated that. And same thing I've repeated with apple seeds. You put an apple seed in the water, and I'll just look at you while we're doing that, and then I'll find the other, where are we? Okay, sorry about that, guys. And I'll have the apple show up, and then I'll let that melt and refreeze it a few days later, and the apple will still be there. And then I'll let that melt and refreeze it a week later, and the apple is still there. And I found that with biological things, the imprint lasts for a long time. So my suggestion not to be too heady also about this, because I found that water will override what you're doing mentally to show you how you're feeling. An example would be I was doing some crystallography for a lady that was all about flower essences, and she also had asked me to put a flower in the water and do some stuff, and I was doing that, but I was really sad, genuinely. And so water didn't design anything to do with flowers. It just showed sad faces in the ice all day long. So it was revealing that it was reading me more than what I was trying to show it. See, I don't see water as a machine. I see this as a relationship, and this relationship has evolved over the 14 years that I've been prolifically doing this. And by that, water has constantly been teaching me and guiding me that you can't lead with ego. And that's why I found that sometimes people, when they begin this work, They, especially the skeptical people. A lot of people ask me, "Oh, what about the skeptical people? You know, they probably don't really think that this is like that will impact them." Well, the true skeptic will actually give it a go. And if they're genuinely giving it a go and they're just like, well, let's just see, they're at least that open. And what I found a lot is that people who start with some kind of at least curiosity without an attachment to outcome, or even don't even know if they're going to be an outcome at all, often will get the best results straight away. And then they'll go, wow, oh wow. And especially people who see this, then the trajectory is to think, oh, I know how to do this now. Oh, this is going to happen. Let me show my friend. Let's do this and let's do that. But actually, that's when things often start going a little bit downhill for them, because now there is an expectation of what the outcome will be. And so it's often the spiritual little nudge that you get from water to actually remember that this should not be led by expectation, but through curiosity, through allowing water to share whatever you need to see, whatever it wants you to see, and that to begin with just being curious. That is the energy I always really recommend, because water is not a machine. By a molecular count, not by volume, you're 99% water, and there are more water molecules in your bodies than stars in all of the perceivable universe. And yet we're just taught that water is H2O at school. So there is much, much more to know about us as well. So let me just go into this next share. I think I might have, did I come out of this? I think this is the one. Yeah, okay. So I want to talk about how this is working a little bit, which will lead me into my latest work. Because I think it's helpful to have some ideas of how this is working. And at the moment, still, I always encourage science to take this further and use other means to try to figure it out. So I try and explain things to the best of my ability from my perspective, and that's what I'm sharing with you. So some years ago, it says here, how is it working? Bees, light, and Gennady Krokalev. So I'm going to go over bees, light, and this particular scientist, which leans into my hydroglyphs and the work I've done with the autistic non-speaking community that I'd like to talk about. So this Indigenous lady said she could speak to bees, and she told me that she would watch their hives for long periods of time until one day a bee somehow communicated to her and said to her, please, we don't mind you looking at our hives, but please could you not look at it for so long, because your conscious expression is putting too much light in the hive and we prefer it to be darker. And so I thought, wow, so that's where we put our conscious expression. Does that mean that's where we put our light? And could that be how water is receiving information through light? And I want to cover a couple of things as well. But let's have a look at what that led me to that helped make sense of this phenomena that you're seeing here. So if I open the freezer at the perfect time, and because all different waters can freeze at different times, as I've also mentioned, so it's my friend's birthday. That's just ignore the little reminder that came up. Hopefully I'll come up and take that away actually.
Oh, we can't see it. It's okay.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's handy. I'll push the play again. So in this particular time, I opened the freezer and I've observed that light is coming out of the ice as it's beginning to form, like I've photographed here. And I'm actually looking at this light through a layer of liquid water. And so you don't see this when you generally open the freezer after several minutes, but in the very early stages, as it's just starting to form, there is light emanating out of the ice that is visible to the naked eye, like a halo. And so I actually think, after having seen this enough times now, that it actually is light emitted from the ice that is stored information that is actually paving the way for the design of the imagery, and that the ice, as it's starting to form, is pushing out light. Essentially, the light starts to emanate from it and actually take the form of the information. Now, this is something I'd like to study much deeper, and I'm doing my PhD and I'm focused on that, finishing that next year. So I hope that I can take this aspect a little bit further. But one of the interesting things is in the fourth phase water stage, this more gel-like, plasma-like stage, your cells are fourth phase water, for example. Egg white is fourth phase water. Aloe vera is fourth phase water. Most fruits have fourth phase water inside of them. So it's more of a plasma, for example. Now, one of the ways that they tell whether or not there's fourth phase water is through a spectrometer where they see how much light it absorbs, and it absorbs more light than quote unquote regular water. Now, in this particular situation, the water has become fourth phase. And I think in this particular situation, it emits more light. It doesn't just absorb more light, it emits more light. And in fact, I think it can use light as the designer. It becomes the designer. It's in a conducive environment to design the imagery. And I think that human beings, we all have electrical charge, we all actually emit light. And when we have a focused thought or a focused feeling, in fact, the feelings, I think, are more received because our heart generates a bigger electromagnetic field where the water is actually able to absorb it. When we focus our intention and thought into the water, that is able to absorb that information and then translate it. Now, regular science will say water, quote unquote, memory is absolutely bollocks, not real, not possible, because the hydrogen bonds and everything are just moving so fast at some trillionth of a second, and water is in molecular chaos, and how could it ever be interested in one thing? And I'm not saying that that's not true. I'm not saying what they're saying chemically, physically is not happening. I'm not saying that's not happening. However, if you ask a quantum physicist, of which I have done, and I've asked several, can you explain the phenomena how was this possible? And they go into quantum tunneling and a bunch of other things. But they also will say there's a difference between molecular chaos and molecular excitement. Now, if you're excited about something, there is something that you are excited about. And so this is relative to this work, and I don't have time to get into this further. But essentially, what I see is that consciousness and water have a lot in common. Now, if you looked at them separately, you might think they were totally separate things. But when you put water and consciousness together, there is this beautiful marriage. Now, I'm not saying that water is conscious. I think it could be far more likely that there are many stages of water, many phases of water, more than we originally think, and that actually water is consciousness, is a body of consciousness. And that, like Rudolf Steiner says, we think we create intelligence, but really we only pull from the universal sea of intelligence. And that perhaps the universal sea of intelligence is actually the waters, because in old days, water was called the waters, not water, where it was considered to be a holy body of intelligence. And then when Romans brought plumbing into creation, people started to see their waste getting taken away by the waters. The waters was reduced to water, and now we reduce it further to H2O. And outside of biblically, though, there is that word, the waters, or waters that we use in our English language, that is relative to something of intelligence, of water being a storehouse of holy energy, of something sacred. And that is when we say her waters broke. The amniotic fluid, I think, is ancestral information and a storehouse of something very divine. But that's a whole other conversation. So I need to actually move this thing because I can't see when it's there. I know you guys don't. So this was a comment that somebody put on Instagram that I added in, and it's saying that in the Kabbalah, it's believed that water is the closest there is to the light of the Creator, which I thought was quite interesting. So I want to talk about Gennady Krokalev, and then I want to launch into my work with the telepathic community, essentially, and a crystallographic image that looks just like ancient language. This guy is called Gen. Um, and and so he essentially is a Russian scientist and psychiatrist, or was, and he was worked with hundreds of psychiatric patients over 20 years. Here you see that he is using something called a zenith camera. He has a scuba diving mask over the eyes of his patient, and he is asking his patient, who has been having hallucinations and visions, which many of his patients were in there for, sadly. He is asking the patient, saying, when you have a vision, please let me know what you see. When you see someone or see something, let me know what you see, and I'm going to take a photograph of your eyes. The reason he even came to this idea was that his brother had given him a magazine in Russian, and the translation was "See the other way around." And it suggested that the retina of the eye receives information from the brain and translates that information into picture format, which is projected out like a hologram, which can be captured on camera. So Gennady was genuinely wondering whether his patients were actually seeing something, and put this whole contraption together to see whether or not this was a real thing. So over the course of 20 years and over 200 patients, 117 of Gennady's patients were able to confirm that the black and white photographs developed in water, by the way, as well, were in fact what they were seeing in their mind's eye. Now, this was very interesting. The very, very sad part about Gennady was that, so he came to a very tragic end. So he rang his brother after the 20 years of doing this work, and he said, I've just discovered something so incredible that it is just going to change the world. You need to get here right away. His brother it took him 3 hours to get there, but when he got there, he found that Gennady was hanging, he was dead, hanging, and that his work had been confiscated and his house had been broken into. So Gennady came to a very, very sad end. And whatever it was that he had discovered was so big, bigger than seeing these mind-made photos. And I'm going to address my idea of what potentially he discovered in a minute, which led me on to working in telepathy. So now he had another idea as well, that maybe it's not just the brain sending information to the eye, to the retina of the eye, which is mostly that fourth phase jelly-like water, is being translated into this holographic imagery. But he also suggested that maybe there's a secondary realm of consciousness that we can't see, but maybe dogs and cats can see, for example, and that maybe there is other things that people can in reality, but not something that we see. Whether he was right about that or not, it's up for speculation, but the suggestion scientifically is that the brain is essentially sending that information signal to the eyes, and the eyes are projecting things out. So imagine if we're focused on one thing constantly, we probably have like this video playing in front of us, which is kind of interesting thought. But this was all repeated by more Russian scientists in the last 25 years. And rather than working with a psychiatric patient, they worked with someone who could remote view. And the scientist stood behind a wall, and they used exactly the same setup with her, with the same camera and the scuba diving mask and whatnot. And the scientist stood behind a wall and held up numbers and shapes. And as this remote viewer tuned in, she'd say, okay, I've got it in my mind's eye. The key was it was in the mind's eye. You couldn't just think about apples and apples would appear. You had to have them in a clear vision in your mind's eye for this to work. And sure enough, she was able to also do this. Now, firstly, this is Gennady's work, and then I'll show you the other lady's work. So this is examples of the photos that were taken from the eyes of his patients. Remembering this is a black and white camera. This is not a photo on the phone. This is taken from light emanating from the eyes. So the first one on the left says antlers in Russian. The middle one is clear enough to see a face. And the other one that looks like a Loch Ness monster says snake. This is the one from the lady who was remote viewing. and she was tuned into the different shapes and numbers, and these are just a couple of examples. Now, all the other scientists end up giving this a go, and they all found that it actually worked. And so they had made a documentary, which has since been removed off YouTube, because I shared the link so frequently, and then I went to go and look at it to do some screen recording on it, and it had been removed. But it was called "See the Other Way Around," essentially, and it was the original part was "Thought is Material." Sorry, "Thought is Material." Um, that was the name of the documentary, and it was in Russian, but there was also English translation. So that was the name. "Thought is Material." It's proven. Thought is material, it's proven. So if anybody finds that up again, please let me know. But I know it was removed the last time I checked. So this is all very interesting that thoughts become things. So then I thought, well, I want to see, to sort of play with telepathy a little bit. So the first one that's blue, that looks like a word, that's slightly different than the rest of them that are shapes. The one that's blue is where I thought, I'm going to close my eyes and I'm going to really try to write a word in my mind's eye. And it took a really long time because I don't generally do that. And I was trying, my brain was trying to make sense of, do you want to do capital letters? Do you want to do small letters? Like, is it cursive? I overthought the whole thing. So I'm closing my eyes, and then I'm just going to do a capital letters of Love. And so I opened my eyes after I had it clearly in my mind, looked at the water, and then immediately I froze the water. And you can see an Love in letters as a word in the ice, which was really incredible to me. And then I started going on to shapes. And so doing the best I could with telepathy. Now, we don't get taught in school how to be telepathic. However, I've come to understand that it's actually not something that we need to overthink. Again, this is so in alignment with the work I've been doing, because my whole job is to not overthink things or not control things either. See, I hear people and they do mean well, but it is a word that we use regularly that I'm encouraging people to shift to use a different word. And that word is programming. See, I hear people say, I'm going to program the water to do X, Y, and Z. See, I have seen that water there seems to be an intelligent design happening here. And so rather than we're using the word programming, which suggests that water will do what you want, you are a body of water. And I find I don't like being told what to do very, very much. I like to be able to create and design or do things. I do things much more when I'm not expected to. So with water, I think that water is actually wild, and I love that about it. And so rather than assuming that it's going to do what you want for your best outcome, why don't you think, perhaps I am going to play with water. I am going to get into relationship with water. I am having a conversation with water whereby we are co-creating as opposed to you programming it to do what you want. We have done that with everything nearly as human beings. I think it's really nice to maybe shift away from that control and come into invitation instead. So coming back to shapes, so I basically would feel in my body where a shape wanted to come out. Sounds weird, right? Because when we think of telepathy, we imagine that we're just the pictures that show a person head to head. So we have this idea that all our thoughts start in the mind. But actually what I found is that when I bring the thought down into my chest, into an area near my heart or in my heart, it works so much quicker. I can visualize or know that there is a shape that is in the beginning, a circle, that I can then move that circle towards the water. And then that circle kind of receives it. I am originally imagined it plopping into the water and then freezing it. And so as I became more familiar with doing this practice, I started doing different shapes, and circle and rectangle and diamond shapes. But when it came to the triangle, which was originally just a two-dimensional triangle that I was imagining, rather than it staying as a triangle in my telepathic communication, actually I churned it into a three-dimensional pyramid just before I sent it into the water. And what I saw was that water designed more of a three-dimensional shape, and it actually came up out of the water to design a pyramid. And so it kind of built scaffolding to become three-dimensional as opposed to staying two-dimensional. That led me on to thinking, wow, well, maybe what Gennady discovered after all of these years of seeing mind-made photographs. Well, my question, which is a very regular question in my world, which is what if? I really encourage that little sentence. What if XYZ? So I thought, well, what if he had actually, because I see that water is building scaffolding and can actually become three-dimensional, which I want to add in another thing that most people don't know about because it's very new for me, in a minute. What if he had discovered that not only can mind-made photos happen, but what if a person is actually able to create something from nothing, from the mind's eye? So rather than it just becoming a photo, what if it's able to compact upon itself and actually come into reality? So Buddha says thoughts become things. What if he actually discovered that something could materialize into the physical from specific thoughts? And I think that would change the world, for sure. If we were able to recognize that there is this even a possibility, if the person could do it, that is enough for there to be something there, like even if that person was somehow very special. So I just thought that was very interesting, and it could be completely wrong, of course, and we may never find out. So I think I'm going to move through some of this just for time. But hydroglyphs essentially came from music. My son had been he'd basically gone through Emoto's book, Messages in Water, and he'd come to me very disheartened. And he'd said to me, Mum, I think water hates me. And I'm like, this is not a book that why would you be thinking that? This is not the kind of book that you should come away thinking that water hates you. And I said, why? And he said, because look, Mum, water only likes heavy metal, only likes classical music and John Lennon and not heavy metal. It hates heavy metal. And I'm like, oh, baby, I didn't know you liked heavy metal. And he said, I don't, but look, it doesn't like swearing either, and pointed to swearing. And he said, but I like Tupac, and Tupac is rapper, and and he swears. Then because I like that, then water must hate me. And I thought, oh, right. Well, honey, if you don't take anything else but this away, remember that water is not in judgment. If anything, one of the more spiritual aspects, and there are many, this is one, is that water is an observer, not a judgment person or judgment figure of kinds. And so I said, let's try. Let's try. So we did a lot of different genres of different songs, and we started with Tupac. And he was into this song at the time called All Eyes on Me. And so he got this big eye in the ice. And my son finally realized, oh, water doesn't hate me. One of the things I added is it's very likely whoever did the heavy metal didn't like it and projected that feeling into the water. So I'm not working with just geometries. I'm also not looking down a microscope. Anyone can do this, as I've demonstrated, using your phone to take photos. So what you see is actually what I see in the dish. You don't need special equipment, which is one of the really lovely things about the work. And to do this, I would basically put the dish of water in front of a speaker, play the song, leave the room. Some songs I'd never heard of before. People gave me ideas for songs, and I never heard the song. I'd come back in when the song had finished and then do the method and photograph the eyes. These boots were made for walking, and you can see it looks like a cowboy boot in there. This is a totally different genre of music. This is Metallica's song Enter Sandman, and you can see it's designed as kind of wings and interesting design, maybe not what people might imagine. And this is Redemption Song by Bob Marley, and water designed in symbols. This is like a beautiful tree, but the whole image actually it looked like it was on a cliff, which is symbolic in a lot of ways I don't have time to get into. This is The Sweetest Taboo by the song Sade, and you might notice that there is some interesting designs in this particular piece, and I actually want to just show you some hieroglyphs that are in this. The only way I can actually do this at the moment, though, is to do it this way, because it won't let me use my cursor when I'm pushing play. So you see all of these areas here that look like language, like coding. Well, this is a coding. This is coding that does very much represent ancient language. Now, if we go over here, see these designs here that look like branching? That is also a hydroglyph. Now, this is a hydroglyph with the very basic information that I've got so far of the word information. It shows up with that word. But I found that this shows up over the last year and a half for everyone, whether or not they're using that word or not. And that's why I got so interested in it, because it seemed like a primary design that we need to understand in this day and age. Now, here there are two primary designs here. This is also one. Now, this branching we know has multiple meanings because I've repeated them so often using words. I'm going to get into why I did this in a minute, but one of the words is change, another of the words is winter, and another of the words is between. So this is change. Let's just start with that as a primary one, and maybe between. So this is information. It's an information of change, perhaps, or information in between. Now, we've got this big design here that looks a lot like a flower. Now, this is interesting because it's right in the middle. And the main word in the song was the sweetest taboo. So it's almost as if this design is designing something, showing us what the sweetest taboo, the most hidden secrets are. And I want to really focus on this picture in future talks. And I will focus on this in my webinar that's at the end of January, because I think this is a very interesting one. Anyway, let me move on about this one. And move this so I can do it. And I know I sound like I'm just talking to myself, but that is what that is. Okay. And here are just more examples. And I genuinely do think that water has some kind of sense of humor, because the song We're Never Getting Back Together by Taylor Swift, there are the letters EX, which stands for ex, like an ex-boyfriend. So it just seemed kind of crazy and fun to me. But Tears in Heaven, Moonlight Sonata, what is that? Okay, coming. And then The House of the Rising Sun, Crimea River, Baby Shark, the bane of so many mothers and fathers' lives. It goes on and on and on. And I started to see that water liked to pick up on music, on the words and songs. And so this is Stairway to Heaven. And I started doing repeat stuff with Stairway to Heaven. I started to see this kind of ladder or stairway show up over and over and over again. And that's when I started to get curious and think, God, I wonder if that actually means stairway, because you know what? It kind of looks like one. So I wrote the word stairway, did the whole process, and saw another stairway. And over the course of 3 months, using different waters as well. I actually try now with hydroglyphs to use the same water across the board, just to keep consistency and to do more of a scientific kind of process. But in the beginning, I tried different waters, and I kept seeing the same design. And then after 50 times of seeing it, because 50 wasn't random in my mind, I'm like, you know what? I actually think this is a symbol that represents the word stairway. And here are 64 examples of the stairway hydroglyph. And I'm like, okay, there is definitely something here. Now, when I did this using the words climb up, because I went on to think, well, what do you do with a stairway? So I wrote the words climb up and I saw the same symbol. Climb down, however, I didn't see anything. When I reversed the song, because people say it's a demon song if you reverse it, I saw nothing because it wasn't coherent. So that led on to other songs. But I want to show you, this is what these stairway hydroglyphs looks like in the crystallography as I'm filming it. And you can see the two lines and the rungs of the quote unquote ladder. Okay, I used the song Single Ladies by Beyonce, lots of genres, by the way. And the point of this is there's this tagline that says, if you like it, then you should have put a ring on it. And so I kept seeing rings. And I'd also put water on top of a wedding invitation, and the main word was marriage. And so I started to wonder, what if this is a symbol relative to marriage? And a lot of my work has come from intuitive thinking. I also think intuition is a state of water, and I'll get to that. Anyway, so I started working with the word marriage, and I also started working with the word ring. And so here are 64 examples of the ring hydroglyph. Now, just so that people understand, many people think that this could be a bubble, and I want to prove that it's not a bubble. So here is the plasma ring. Now, if you scan to the right, you can see bubbles floating around. Those are bubbles. Now, you can see this plasma ring before I've even tipped the liquid away. So this is how clear this is in the ice. Okay. This is the change hydroglyph that I just showed you in the sweetest taboo. You can see this pattern repeat. These are all 64 examples. So some of these I have 3 words that interrelate, which means I need to have repeated each one 50 or more times. And I have other people around the world that are also doing this with me, and some of them have a real knack at it. Now, the knack, if you will, is to get out of your head, not to have an expectation. See, people will say, now you're expecting to see that. That's an important question. When people say, now you're expecting to see it, therefore you're projecting. Water doesn't work that way. I just told you that from the beginning. When you have an expectation, you're less likely to see it. The key is to actually come into almost like a friendship where you're not expecting, you're just in resonance with one another. There is this kind of neutrality in a way where you accept whatever is. The circle on its own is completion. I've also come to see that it looks like it's starting to mean children as well, which is quite interesting because the conception hydroglyph is 2 circles touching, meaning conception. And when I've worked with astrology with Pam Gregory, and I've been working on a project with her for nearly a year and a half now, every new moon shows the conception hydroglyph, which is really interesting. Again, that's stuff I talk about in my webinar. So here is one which has got a few of them in here. And they don't touch these single circles. Sometimes you just see one. And often you see more than one hydroglyph in a dish, which is when you start putting them together to try to understand what they mean somehow. This is an important one. This is the message hydroglyph. It is basically like a kind of triangle shape with frills on each side, and then there's coding on top. Now you might recognize that coding. Remember the sweetest taboo? How I told you it looked like ancient language? The coding is on top of the message, and there is on the sides because frill-like designs. Sometimes at the tip of those, you can see hearts, which we know is also a hydroglyph for love. So it would be a message of love or information about love, something like that. And then some of them don't have hearts at the end of them, which means that this is just information of some kind or a message of information. There is a lot to go into. I can talk for hours, trying to keep it short, which is always hard. So this is an example of what it looks like. I'm going to but past a lot of this. This is too much to get into. So I'll just whiz through it. This is a bunch of my hydroglyphs. Anyone can get my list of hydroglyphs from my website to start understanding the language of water. You can use it for diagnostics. Again, I know this is a shorter interview and people will have questions, so I really don't have a lot of time to get into the nitty-gritty, and if I've already gone over time, please tell me. But this was where a lady, her dog got really sick really quick, but the day before she'd been on one of my beginners workshops and I'd gone over all the hydroglyphs. Now these little lines that I'd zoomed in on, they are the hydroglyph with the meaning of sugar. And so her dog had been like vomiting and sick and everything. She gave the dog some water to drink, and then she froze it. She was waiting for the vet to come. Her friend was a vet, and her vet took about an hour or something to get there. They finally found out anyway that the dog had got into this stash of chocolate Easter eggs that she'd been hiding for grandchildren, and was actually made itself really sick. But the sugar showed up in the bowl of water that it had just drunk a little bit from. So that's why I talk about diagnostics a little bit. What's the point? I think there's lots of points, and I would honestly recommend you go and you watch my interview with Pam Gregory on YouTube, because I do kind of go over a lot of this, and a lot of my other podcasts too, latest podcasts go into this, where I talk about the work that I did with a mum, basically, who had a non-speaking child who was severely disabled, and the mum really just was so exhausted, had no friends, community, she had no family, she was doing this on her own, she was just exhausted all the time. And she asked me, she really just wanted to know if her daughter knew that she loved her, because she says, I'm just angry all the time. Well, she sees an angry face. And I said, I don't know how I can help you. And she said, what if I record my daughter's noises that she makes, if she makes them, when I ask her that question, do you know how much I love you? So she did that, and then she recorded these sort of grunting sounds, and I played them to the water, and the water designed 4 hydroglyphs in a dish. They wanted to keep their dish private. However, they've allowed me to tell the story and show what hydroglyphs were in there. The empty hexagon is I, an individual. The heart is love, multiple circles is multiple or a lot, and the speckle on the right is both earth as well as mother. And basically I got onto a call, I'm just telling you the whole thing, I got onto a call and FaceTimed them, and I said, well, Mum, you've been wondering if your daughter knows how much, you love her, but your daughter has a message for you. She is saying, I love you so much, Mummy. And the mum was just crying, but the little girl, she was trying to clap her hands and making sounds. And in this moment, I knew that this work is a voice for the voiceless, which led me on to working with some of the autistic non-speaking community that can communicate through telepathy and through their letterboards. You may have listened to the telepathy tapes. I began working with some of the people from the telepathy tapes. I since now working with people that are within the community but not in the telepathy tapes, and they have been absolutely incredible. They are tapped into other realms of consciousness, has helped me evolve my work. One of the reasons I talk about water in the Akashic records, perhaps, and again, this is more states of water, is because that coding that I see show up for nearly everybody, whether or not they're using the word information or not, this last year and a half specifically, even astrologically, that's important, according to Pam Gregory and some other people, is that this is something we need to start to look at and pay attention to and to try even to understand. Now, when you look at how much information is in these, and then you compare them with ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs and cuneiform, you're like, wow, they look so much like it. And one of the reasons that I really focused on this is when I was speaking at the last annual water conference in Lisbon, I was told very strictly I could only show repeatability. I went through a whole half hour of repeatability for hydroglyphs, but I couldn't help but just look how much this looks like ancient language. And so someone took a screenshot and put it into ChatGPT and said, find the ancient language. And it did find the ancient language of the hieroglyphs and the cuneiform, but it picked out little pieces of the ice, saying this looks like pieces of ancient language as well. So I was inspired to start to see if I could use some of the other pictures I've got to see if it could pick up any ancient language. I worked with ChatGPT for 3 days until I realized it wasn't the direction I want to go. I'm interested in biological intelligence rather than artificial intelligence. The only thing that I found most helpful with doing this process was that the So this is just another example of it. Water was able to take the background out and really focus in on this kind of coating that's in the ice. So this is when I stopped using AI, and I thought, how am I ever going to start to understand this coating when you start to zoom in on it and you see just how much is here, and then you start zooming in closer. It's like, how do I even know this piece of coating? Like it's too much. Like I felt very overwhelmed. And that's when we watched the telepathy tapes. And that's when I started to wonder if this community could help. Without getting into all the details, lots of things, amazing things happened to bring me together with the most amazing community. And they did start to help me. And so this is too much. This woman's work is phenomenal. She's working with plasma. She's seeing the same, and by plasma for her, it is urine and blood. So when I met with her, because we've been filming for a documentary about all of this amazing topics that cover this whole span of interests that I have, from the ancient world to the latest work in science to quantum biology, to healing with water, to different types of water, to a whole bunch of stuff. Fiona, I couldn't go past. Her work, she sees pictures like me, but she's also seen, so I gave her some of my urine samples. So I never actually thought I'd ever be sharing urine samples to people, but here we are. I'm here. I'm doing it. But what's so interesting is that this is one of my samples, and this is through a microscope, and this is it forming as it is using a specific technique. But what you might notice is the information hydroglyph is even in my urine, everywhere. And that was in real time, how quickly it formed. Here's a close-up of another piece of plasma of mine. It was just showing this coating, which is exactly what I've been seeing in the ice. And just to compare it again to the coating that I'm seeing in the crystallography, how similar it looks. Again, there's more and more, and it also emits light, which is fascinating. And this is one of the most fascinating videos. I hope this one's the sped up one. This is the plasma before it's even crystallized. It is breathing. And here's what's amazing about her, and she's speaking also in my webinar in the end of January, is that she's found that she doesn't work with a lot of people, but she uses their same plasma sample over years. And she's found that the plasma will show imagery that is relative to that person in real time, or even still predictive that it will happen in a month, for example. One would be a pregnant woman showed up in the crystallography that she got. And this was a year later, and the woman found out that she was pregnant a month after the sample had showed up. And so it's suggesting that the sample is still connected to you, even after a year, even when it's not in your body. And there's a lot to be thought of about this. And this is my sample breathing with light before it comes into its crystallographic formation, and breathing with light and color. Now, this is not the fast forwarded one, unfortunately. This is the very slow one, so we'll just move on. But you can see down below, now it's starting to crystallize. So that breathing was continued to happen even before crystallography came, which is very, very relative to what I was talking about, there being light first and then crystallography that I see in my work. So her work supports my work in a really big way. But let's move on. So I sent 12 images to the autistic non-speaking community who speak through their telepathic communicator and through letterboards. And so I sent these examples off, and I also sent these examples off. And I said, look, I'm just trying to find out what this coding could mean. I'm going to just read to you some of what they've said. And I have to move this thing out of my way here. There we go. So this is, excuse me, I have to also do this. What is going on over here? Hopefully this works. Okay, this is from Sammy. She said the general message of the images is about foundational structure to build or co-create the new. The images are like music, actually, sheet music to inform everything that is matter on the planet, that a cosmic cycle has closed and a new epoch is beginning. And the way the lines are is like foundational structure at the pre-manifestation levels. This was Sammy telepathically communicating through her mum. Daniel, he is incredible. I can't even explain. They are doorways into another realm of consciousness. Each code is a doorway, each little line is a doorway. Can you remember how many lines were in the coding that I'm seeing? It represents God consciousness experiencing itself as multiple doorways as God consciousness expresses itself through multiple humans. Veda is uncovering something that has not been seen before, which is still hard for me to get my head around because I always assume this is something ancient. Anyway, she is unveiling a consciousness that is ready to be seen, but a direct translation is difficult because it's not writing as we know it. It is all multidimensional form. One must take into consideration angles, colors, and the way the writing is connected. And I want to focus on the word doorway because it is the best word I can give to what these hieroglyphs are offering. It is a doorway of a stream of consciousness. It goes deep into the cells of the body because our bodies are made up of water. Now, all of the autistic non-speaking community say that there is healing that comes from even the looking at these images, and that there is sound emitting from them as well. If you have watched the telepathy tapes, Kyle is the musician in episode 8, and when he saw them after his mum shared them, he asked what they were. He actually spoke the word doorways. So doorways is the theme of this coding. Now, they've given some that are healing and have healing properties. So this is one. And so in the meditation of them, there is healing. Now, I would also like at some point in the future to have a gallery of healing photographs that people can go in and actually there'd be sound and all kinds of different things happening to see if we could actually find the sound some way. I don't know yet how to do that. I think there are very clever people in the world that might be able to help me with that. Anyway, we actually have this one on our fridge. I asked, what is water, to them, and Mikolai said to ask the question, what is water? One must ask, what is the creator before form? Sammy said, water is a redeemer. It washes away much like source cleansing you. The mysteries of water will dazzle you and dazzle humanity. It indeed reflects source creator, sentient consciousness. It's a hall of records and the hall of mirrors, and it knows all your secrets. Noah said, water is the expression of the Creator's first love. It is a being that the Creator never wants to separate from. Therefore, it's in everything. It's love. And his sister Adriana said, it's embedded in everything. We see water's essence in the watermarks. Is the energy not still there? Do we not see that water has been there? We can still feel it. Can you not hear the water in a shell, even after the water is gone? The water still echoes. So therefore, I would say that, yes, indeed, it is a sentient being. Daniel says Veda is tapping into something that is essentially tapping into the consciousness of God. And this is my beautiful friends. Up the top is Melissa, my incredible telepathic communicator. She is telepathic with many autistic non-speakers. And below is Elsa and her mum. And you can see what I'm doing here. Elsa, one of the questions is, what is water?
She says G, go with the word O, D, God.
She's using her letterboard.
Is in the WATER. God is in the water.
And I have another video with her in a minute. And Tyler, who's just a little guy, says, water is life. It's living. It's intelligent. It carries the wisdom of the earth. It's our greatest gift. It's God. Now, I'm not saying that I know that what truth is here, but I am relating something that seems to have a lot of consistency within this community. I've asked how many states of water there are, and this is an important one because we get stuck on it just being a liquid, solid, gas, and there's still controversy even about the plasma. I'm curious if you can tell me how many stages or phases of water are there?
You know, number? Seven?
Everyone, it's wonderful. Across the board, everyone says the same thing. It's always seven.
Wow.
Always.
Wow.
Now, I have a question that you may or may not be able to answer. But can you describe any of the stages of water that we don't know about yet in this world?
You want Melissa to talk for you? Yeah. Okay.
You said the first state of water is the thought. The thought is the initial state. The second state is the transformation of the two different frequencies that meet up to make the light of the water.
So that's kind of a big thing. And they go on to say all the rest of it, but that thought is a state of water. So I think that it's likely then that intuition could very much be a state of water. And I would encourage you to just check out the reel that I made on Instagram or Facebook, just to see how I expanded upon that. Other insights. Brandon is just such a dude. Oh my God, we had the pleasure of filming with him. He's amazing. And I asked about what he would say to scientists that say that water can't store memory. And he said, well, what do you think holds memory then? It isn't the electricity in our brain. It isn't the organs in the brain. How do you think we hold memory? It's the water within us.
Veda, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. We have to end in about 12 minutes and love to leave a tiny bit of time for questions. So, and I
Right.
dread
about-
cutting you off, but so just a
That's
little
fine.
time warning. So
That's
maybe
fine.
like 5 more minutes, 3 minutes.
No problem. I would just say that I'll leave on these kind of words of hope that Sammy said, and then I'm done. And then we can ask some questions. So Sammy says that things that are out of tune and out of harmony will cease to exist because the power of all this is overtaking the planet at rapid rates and cannot be stopped. We're too far along in the process, and no one saw us coming, and the evil ones could not see our true potential. Even if they tried to stop us with poisons, they did not know that they helped us stay out of the body and bring in something new. So I will stop my share and make myself big over here so I can see, and do this so I can see all of you and come over into a different view. There we go.
Oh my God, you're so delightful. Every time I hear you speak, I learn new things, and I'm always so appreciative of your wisdom and your willingness to share with so many people, especially your methodology. So I'd love to open it up to anyone that might have questions. Anybody want to,
Yes, I had
I don't know
one
if you can-
comment.
Jay Paul, please go
Yeah,
ahead.
Veda, so great to see you. I'm sorry we can't meet up in Washington anyway. Um, you give absolutely new meaning to AI, aqua intelligence. So next time, whenever I see AI, I will be thinking of your work. Thank you. So great. Chills. Blessings, and plan to take your in January. That looks really good. Thank you much.
Let's see, John, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. What a pleasure, Veda. And my question, I guess, in relationship to this group is, have you done images with hot water? Spring water, like what the interest is here.
I have done some work with thermal water, and I know my friend and fellow crystallographer John, who's very prolific in this work, has done quite a lot of imagery with thermal water as well. And one of the things that I often have to remind people ask me this question a lot, and that is, does boiling water or really hot water lack structure or not? or even boiled water, is it ruined structurally? So what I found with both thermal water and water that's been boiled, they don't have the same patterns, but what I've seen is that they certainly still have cohesive patterns. In fact, tap water that's boiled does show better patterns than it did originally. And I think that this is also the water that comes out of the ground. I think of the water that comes out of the ground a bit like a fluid-filled organ. And in ancient times, the water that comes out of the ground was considered to be an organ of the world, an organ of Mother Earth. And that people, rather than going in to heal themselves, would actually bathe in them to help heal the organs. And that was understood that actually it was the other way around in the old ways. If you go through into some of my own Indigenous culture, we have a lot of beautiful thermal pools in New Zealand. And there was some of the real elders would say, no, yes, we can go in there to help ourselves heal, but actually the thermal waters have their own voice, and the ancient and Indigenous able to understand when the bubbles boiled a certain way, the water was asking for help. And when the bubbles boiled a different way or bubbled a different way, the water was happy. They would say happy. And so they knew when they needed to actually enter into or to go into ceremony together that they would form into a circle and beat the water certain ways, like drumming, to be able to help with its healing. But that the thermal water is one of the most important waters to be interacted with because they reflected the organs, very specific types of organs, which are not just like our organs, but there are the earth has many, many sense organs. But when there is an organ that is filled with water and it is warm and it is coming up like this, then there's something very special about that. And what I've seen, similar to John, is that we see the creation hydroglyph show up a lot with thermal waters. And that is a specific design that I've seen show up multiple times with the very rudimentary but very big word of creation. I hope that.
Fantastic. That's amazing. Janet, you want to ask your question?
Thank you, Veda. Thank you so much for your work. I love how it keeps expanding. And are you working in collaboration with anybody who's really up on fascia, the body's fascia system?
What I have happy about is that people can now get a degree in my work that can lead on to a master's and PhD even through Ubiquity University. And there's someone in the group who is a fascia master, and her whole thing is trying to understand the relationship more through a crystallographic medium, through working with urine, to be able to see how those structures change in the urine before and after fascia work. And I often encourage people, because this isn't limited to the water that comes out of our tap or out of the lakes or the streams, for example. But we are a body of water, and urine is very accessible, and especially the work of Fiona Gardner, being able to start looking at water in a whole new level. But yes, with the fascia and with before and after deep massage and things like that, doing a urine sample beforehand and then doing the urine sample afterwards, and also doing it with the same person before, like just on a more consistent level. So urine sample and then an hour next another urine sample to see, okay, nothing changed. And then do the fascia, like massage and deep tissue, and then do a urine sample and see, did it change? And being able to see, actually, she's doing a whole thing of monitoring herself and another person, maybe more than one person, each hour, testing urine samples to see how they change and what they look like on an everyday level. And then seeing after being a deep fascia tissue release or various different other types of of massage, do you see differences in urine? And so far, the couple of things that I have seen that she's done is looking really promising, very, very much so. I've also did this a similar thing to not as big a degree as she's doing because she's wanting to take this over a course of a year or two, which I encourage long-term studies for this work, is with what's it called, IV ozone, because I was quite unwell for a while. So I did my sample, and it was not a good sample of urine. Often, for a really healthy urine sample, you will see hexagonal patterns. You will see similar patterns to the happy or healthy energetic state of water that I see in water alone. You will see very similar patterns in urine. However, when I was quite sick and I had a thyroid issue and some stuff, it was almost like it looks similar to the water after it's been in a microwave. It didn't show very much structures at all. In fact, it was like white noise. That's how it looked. And so after my intravenous ozone therapy, I actually started to see my urine look like it started to come back alive. So this work has so much room for expansion. And I recommend anybody who has a passion to focus on that. So that's as much as I can tell you for now.
Thank you. And Fiona is the person, or there's other fascia water folk? And what I understand about fascia now is that they're understanding that the lighter the touch and the lighter the body work, the more fascia responds. The harder work kind of shuts it, it braces to it, right? So, but yeah, I will keep studying. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's a really interesting study, and I'm very interested. And I agree. Often the lighter the touch, the more the response. I think we, as human beings, have got used to thinking that really hard's going to get in there and do the stuff. But it's a similar thing with water. I actually find less is more.
All right, we have maybe time for one more question. Marcus, you want to go ahead?
I'll give it up for anybody else who wants to ask if there's something. If not, I've got a question.
I don't see any other hands unless I'm
Okay.
missing somebody.
Oh, Veda, I'll just maybe real quick, I really appreciate a lot of what you're saying about kind of the diagnostic ability or the ability for water to communicate the state of being. But in that idea that water is a communication medium, what about its use as a therapy? Have you done any work, or are you in communication with anybody who does work, more on, taking that communication message and utilizing it to change the state back into the body, communicating back that direction? Anything on that?
Lots of things around that. In fact, I'm about to reveal a very specific designs that water has given me, and the reason for that is that I get asked by many Indigenous people, what can I do? What can we do for our waters that are being raped, pillaged, or mined, or whatever, to help the water come back into a living state? And yes, I always recommend trying to find rights of personhood, trying to be able, not find it, but try to rally for that. But that's like a very legal process. The first one was done here in New Zealand, where one of our rivers actually does have rights of personhood. It can literally vote, but it's cared for by the Maori tribe. Outside of that, what can we do? Well, I think that I've been working on this project for a while, like really just sort of spurred on by this question, what can we do for the waters and also the waters within us? But this is really one for people to help with the waters outside of us, which will also help the waters inside of us, because in the Maori culture, there is a saying that the health of the river reflects the health of the people, one and the same. And so I've been given some codes that come from hydroglyphs, where essentially it is the most highest energetic state of health communicating with the water outside of these as well, communicating with itself from a high level. And by even drawing these codes into the sand and then letting the seawater come in and take it away, the first time I ever did that, this power shell, which you call abalone, I think, just got washed straight up at my feet when it pulled away and came back. And so you can draw these symbols on stones, put them into waterways, and I know that water has a language of symbols. So it's water speaking to water, and this is something that I'm going to just give away totally free on social media to show people how to do that, how to write them, how to make them, and anyone that actually understands that this is a real phenomenon will understand that this could be massive. It is a much bigger deal. And then for the water coming in us, that I think it is also about you're the welcoming committee. I've done studies on saliva that suggest that your last word and sentence is reflected in the crystallography of saliva. That means that the saliva is the most liquid state, the most water-like state that liquid water is coming into touch with. So the last word you spoke or sentence you said has a resonance in your mouth, and when you drink that water, that is what welcoming feels like to that water. And I always think if you just look, and I'm not talking about primary water inside the Earth's mantle, I'm talking about the water on the surface of Earth, and there's only about 2% of that is drinkable. That water has managed to find its way to you. And in my culture, there are ancestors in the water, and the water has found its way to you to give you strength or mana or information. And if we completely ignore it, that's like an ancestor at your door that you ignore. So if you even just have a simple thank you in the resonance of your mouth and you drink that water is going to be received in an entirely different way than just ignoring it. And it goes very much deeper into we think that we need to drink the best water in the world and this and this and this, but I've actually seen people reverse really serious issues that they've had by being in right relationship with water and by being in a very conscious manner when they drink it. Now, I personally love spring water, to go and collect spring water. Water is very sensitive to light, and this is a big factor. So I always use blue glass bottles or Myron glass bottles. They have different purposes. We don't have a lot of time to go into all of the different purposes probably, but blue glass is the only time I would say put water in the sun, because the sunshine that shines through that blue color into, and it has to be blue glass, into the water does improve structure. But it's been proven through a friend of mine who's a brain surgeon that worked on had a friend who was in a very terrible car accident, but follows my work, and said, what can I do? What water should I give her? And I said, blue solar water, which is the best water you can find. Put it in the sunlight in a blue glass bottle, and then drinking. And so she would start giving her friend who had like a terrible brain injury, blue solar water is what it's called. And she was able to measure that every time that this lady drank from this blue solar water, her blood pressure would go down because her blood pressure was significantly elevated. And that would last for about an hour to an hour and a half. And then when she would drink again, they would notice the change. So they were able to actually monitor that. It helps with toothache. It helps particularly with anxiety, which is one of the reasons I really, really enjoyed mostly drinking water from blue glass. Myron glass, which is more of a violet glass, Miron. It looks black. That is the kind of water vessel I like to have my water in if I'm going through a lot of EMF. If I am speaking to someone that sharing a lot of like really heavy, dark, deep information. If you're a counselor and you want to drink water, but you don't want it to be impacted by all of the things the person's saying, Myron glass has got like a force field around it. It's very special. It's also a very high vibrational color in that violet spectrum. And I found that it also can even help the water to become a little more alkaline, whereas water in a red glass bottle or orange glass bottle tends to make the water just a fraction more acidic. And I wouldn't recommend those colors, although there are variations of the red that do different things, and that's a whole nother thing again. But color does impact water, just as color impacts us as human beings. And water is so sensitive to artificial light that it can start to denature and structure in a very specific order. Like spring water looks like a very specific hexagonal star-like pattern, which I call a star fern hexagon, and that degrades almost all the way down to a line, just a line, within 72 hours of being exposed to artificial light.
Fantastic. Veda, thank you so much for being with us today. We're so honored that you share your wisdom with us. And Marcus, do you want to close out with any last BANA
Sure.
words?
I'll reiterate great thanks to Veda for showing up and being so generous with your time and managing the time difference and being able to just share so generously with all the great work that you've been doing. It's, sparked a lot of interesting questions in my mind, and I think hopefully in the minds of this community, we're all here in service in some way to the Earth's waters. And I think that, understanding kind of another way of relating to those waters it's just been a really useful and interesting conversation. So really, really want to thank you and thank everybody else for showing up today and for being a supporting member of BANA. And we look forward to bringing more content like this in the future. And Veda, best of luck in all of your research and all of your work that you continue to do. We will be keeping an eye to see where things go for you. So thank you so much.
I would just last thing, I would encourage all of you to go to VedaAustin.com and buy her new book and sign up for her any of her courses upcoming and just support the work that Veda is doing because it's so important to the world.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. I'm very, very grateful. It's great to see you, Anastasia. You're doing
Always.
wonderful here, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this. And there's so many familiar faces here, and it's so wonderful to see you all. And I appreciate the support a lot, because there is always a lot of skeptical stuff and this and that and the other. But it's so nice to feel so appreciated by so many water lovers. So thank you very much.